The wind howled low across the Arizona desert that night, like it knew what was coming. A single lantern swung from a rusted hook above the entrance to the Silver Queen mine. Its weak yellow light barely touched the ground. There she was, Lila Voss, 22 years old, on her knees in the cold dirt. Her father's body lay sprawled beside her, blood still warm soaked into the parched earth around his chest. One bullet. Clean. Final. She stared at his open eyes, eyes that had once looked at her with quiet pride when she helped him chip silver from these very rocks. Now they stared at nothing. 3 men stood in a half-circle around her, their shadows stretched long and ugly under the lantern light. At the center, Victor Kane, tall, thin lips, eyes like polished flint, a man who smiled only when he was about to take something that wasn't his. He held a folded paper in one gloved hand. In the other, a Colt revolver barrel still smoking. 60 seconds. Miss Voss, Victor said, his voice smooth as oil on water. Sign the deed. Transfer the Silver Queen to me, or you join your father tonight. Lila's hands trembled. She could feel the cold steel of the other 2 guns pointed at her head. The metal glinted faintly in the lantern glow. Her throat was so tight she could barely breathe. Papa, I'm sorry. I wasn't fast enough. Memories flashed behind her eyes, her father's rough laugh when they struck a new vein last spring. The way he used to press a silver dollar into her palm on her birthday. The promise he made that this mine would finally give them a future. All of it, ending right here. Victor tapped the barrel of his gun against his thigh. Slow, patient, cruel, 50 seconds. Lila's fingers brushed the wooden stock of her father's old rifle lying useless in the dirt. Too far, too slow. Tears cut clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks, but she refused to let them fall completely. She looked up at Victor Kane, hatred burning hotter than the desert sun. You'll burn in hell for this, she whispered, voice cracking like dry leather. Victor chuckled softly. Maybe, but not tonight. He cocked the hammer. The click echoed louder than any gunshot. Lila's heart slammed against her ribs. Time stretched, slowed, became nothing but the sound of her own breathing and the whisper of the wind. She reached for the paper. Her hand shook so badly the pen nearly slipped from her fingers, but just as the tip touched the line, one of the gunmen shifted his weight. His boots scraped stone. In that split second, Lila made her choice. She threw herself sideways. The gunshot exploded. The bullet tore through the air where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. Dust and rock fragments sprayed across her face. She hit the ground hard, rolled behind her father's body, and went completely still. Blood from his wound smeared across her dress. Warm, sticky. She forced her eyes to stay open just a sliver. Forced her chest to stop moving. She played dead. Victor stepped closer. His boots stopped inches from her face. He nudged her shoulder with the toe of his boot. Nothing. He spat on the ground. Stupid girl. Should have signed. He turned to his men, dragged the old man inside the mine shaft, collapsed the entrance at first light, make it look like a cave-in, and burn any papers that say otherwise. The men grunted and moved. Lila lay there, tasting dirt and blood and grief so heavy it threatened to crush her lungs. Every muscle screamed to run, to scream, to fight. But she didn't. She waited. The lantern light swung away as the men carried her father's body into the black mouth of the mine. Darkness swallowed them. Only then, when the night had grown thick and silent again, Did Lila Voss slowly push herself up? Her legs shook. Her hands were slick with her father's blood. She looked once more at the dark entrance where they had taken him. Then she turned toward the open desert. And she ran into the cold, endless dark. With nothing but the clothes on her back, the taste of betrayal on her tongue, and a fire in her chest that no bullet could put out. Because in the West, silver wasn't just wealth. It was blood. It was life. And it was worth killing for. In this story, you'll discover what happens when a young woman refuses to let greedy men write the final page of her life. You'll see how one act of courage, born in the deepest pain, can ripple across an entire town and remind us all that true strength isn't measured in gold or silver, but in the quiet decision to stand up, even when the whole world wants you on your knees. Here is Pan-hai, written as a complete, ready-to-record narration script. Pan-hai, the stranger who carried ghosts. The desert doesn't forgive. For 2 days and 2 nights, Lila Voss ran. Her boots were torn. Her lips cracked and bled. The sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil, and the night brought cold that sank into her bones. Every step sent pain shooting through her blistered feet. Every breath burned her throat. She kept moving anyway, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant Victor Kane had won. On the morning of the 3rd day, the world began to blur. Black spots danced in front of her eyes. Her knees buckled near a dry wash lined with jagged rocks. She fell. The sand felt almost soft against her cheek. Just a little rest, she thought. Just a minute. Then she heard it. Hooves. Slow, steady. A horse snorted nearby. Lila forced her eyes open. A man sat in the saddle watching her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a dusty black coat, and a face that looked like it had been carved from desert stone. A week's worth of dark stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes, those eyes had seen too much. Colt Ramsey. He held the reins loosely in one hand. In the other, a wanted poster fluttered in the hot wind. "You alive?" he asked. His voice was low, rough, like gravel under boots. Lila tried to push herself up. Her arms shook and gave out. "I'm not your business," she whispered. Colt studied her for a long moment. Then he swung down from the saddle boots, crunching on the sand. He crouched beside her, uncorked his canteen, and held it to her lips. She drank too fast. Water spilled down her chin. "Easy," he said quietly. "You'll make yourself sick." When she could finally speak again, she looked up at him with raw, desperate eyes. "Please, just ride on. They'll kill anyone who helps me." Colt's face didn't change, but something flickered behind those hard eyes. He reached out to help her stand. That was when the silver badge slipped from the torn pocket of her dress and fell into the sand. Her father's badge. The one he wore the day they first struck silver. Colt froze. He picked it up slowly, turning the worn metal between his fingers. She remembered her father's voice. "We don't turn our back on the lost ones, Lila." She held out her hand. Tommy hesitated, then stepped closer. "I don't have a home anymore," he said quietly. "Neither do I." Lila answered, her voice thick. She pulled him gently into her arms. For the first time in days, she felt something warmer than fear. Colt watched from the doorway. He didn't speak, but his shoulders eased just a fraction. Maggie poured coffee and set a plate of beans and cornbread on the table. "Eat," she said softly. "Tomorrow's problems can wait till morning." Lila looked around the small lamplit room, at the wary stranger who carried ghosts, at the tough saloon owner with a hidden kind heart, and at the orphaned boy now curled against her side. She was no longer completely alone. But trust, real trust, still felt as fragile as a candle flame in the desert wind. And somewhere out there, Victor Kane was still hunting. In this part of the story, you'll feel how a single act of quiet kindness can begin to heal even the deepest wounds, and how the family we choose can sometimes save us long before blood ever could. The desert wind carried more than dust that night. It carried the smell of smoke and the taste of fear. Lila woke suddenly in the small back room behind Maggie Thorne's saloon. Her heart was already racing before her eyes even opened. Tommy Reed was shaking her shoulder, his small voice tight with panic. "Miss Lila," the skies glowing red over the canyon. She sat up fast. Colt was already at the window, pulling on his coat, his face grim in the lamplight. They didn't need words. They both knew. Victor Kane had found out she was still breathing. By the time they reached the rim of the canyon, the Silver Queen mine was already burning. Flames roared out of the entrance like a living thing, greedy and unstoppable. Thick, black smoke rolled upward, choking the stars. Buck Harlan stood near the mouth of the mine, his broad blacksmith shoulders silhouetted against the fire. He had sold his soul for Victor's money. Now he was making sure every scrap of evidence disappeared. Lila's breath caught in her throat. That mine wasn't just rock and silver. It was the last piece of her father still left on this earth. She started running before Colt could stop her. "Wait," he shouted. But she didn't. The heat hit her like a wall as she got closer. Her eyes stung. Her lungs burned. Colt caught up, grabbing her arm. "It's too late, Lila. The whole shaft's going up." She yanked free, tears already cutting through the soot on her face. "I can't lose what's left of him." A sudden gust of wind whipped the flames higher. Sparks rained down like angry fireflies. Colt cursed under his breath, then grabbed 2 wet burlap sacks from the supply shed. "Stay low," he ordered. "Cover your mouth." Together they charged into the mouth of hell. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and heat. Timbers groaned and cracked overhead. Lila beat at the base of the flames with everything she had, swinging the heavy sack again and again until her arms screamed. Colt worked beside her, taller, stronger. But the fire was winning. A burning beam suddenly gave way above them. Colt shoved Lila hard, knocking her clear. The beam crashed down across his left shoulder and back. He roared in pain as flames licked at his coat. Lila screamed his name. She threw herself at the burning wood, dragging it off him with raw, bleeding hands. Colt staggered to his feet, his left arm hanging useless, the fabric of his shirt burned away, skin already blistering. But he didn't stop. They kept fighting. Side by side, 2 broken souls against an inferno. Outside, the wind turned vicious. A full sandstorm howled down the canyon, driving sand and ash into their faces like needles. Just when Lila thought they would both die there, a new voice cut through the roar. "Over here this way." Reverend Elias Crow appeared at the edge of the firelight, his black coat flapping wildly. The quiet preacher carried 2 shovels and a heavy wool blanket soaked in water. He didn't ask questions. He simply started digging a fire break with steady, determined strokes. "Protect what remains," he called out over the wind. "Not with hate, but with what you still have left." His words hit Lila harder than the heat. She looked at Colt, at his burned arm, at the pain he tried to hide behind clenched teeth. She looked back at the mine, at the greedy flames swallowing her father's dream. And for the first time since that terrible night, she had to make a real choice. Run and keep living as a ghost, or stay and fight for something bigger than revenge. Tears mixed with sweat and ash on her face. She kept swinging the sack. They finally contained the worst of it just before dawn. The fire retreated, leaving behind blackened timbers and the bitter smell of defeat. Colt leaned heavily against the rock wall, breathing hard, his face pale beneath the soot. Blood and blisters covered his left arm. Lila dropped to her knees beside him, gently wrapping his wound with a strip torn from her own skirt. Her hands shook as she worked. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to come back for this." Colt looked at her through half-closed eyes. His voice was rough with pain but steady. "I've run from too many fires already." Reverend Elias Crow stood a few feet away, watching them both with quiet understanding. He placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. "Child, justice isn't born from vengeance. It grows when we choose to protect what's still good, even when every part of us wants to burn it all down." Lila closed her eyes. Inside her chest, something was shifting. The fear was still there, sharp and cold. But beside it now lived a new feeling, a quiet, stubborn resolve. She looked toward the distant lights of Dust Creek, where a small boy named Tommy was probably waiting scared and alone. She couldn't run anymore. Not if it meant leaving him behind. Not if it meant letting Victor Kane take everything. Again. The sandstorm slowly died as the first pale light touched the horizon. But inside Lila Voss, a different kind of storm had just begun. In this chapter, you'll feel the heavy weight of choosing courage over fear and discover how protecting others can slowly heal the deepest wounds we carry alone. The morning after the fire smelled of ash and broken dreams. Lila Voss stood alone in the ruins of the Silver Queen mine as the sun rose blood-red over the canyon. Black timbers still smoked quietly. The entrance had collapsed into a jagged scar in the earth. In her soot-stained fist, she clutched the last silver badge that had belonged to her father. The metal felt warm against her palm, almost alive. She stared at the destruction throat tight, eyes burning for more than smoke. Everything he worked for, gone in one night. Footsteps approached from behind. Colt Ramsey walked slowly, his left arm wrapped in fresh bandages, face pale and drawn with pain he refused to show. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space. "They're saying you died in the flames," he said quietly. "Victor's already calling it an accident." Lila didn't turn around at first. Her voice came out hoarse. "He's selling the rights today, right in the middle of town, like none of this ever happened." Colt was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke low and careful. "We can't win this with guns alone. Not anymore." Later that same morning, Dust Creek buzzed with ugly excitement. Victor Kane had set up a public auction on the steps of the old courthouse. A large hand-painted sign declared Silver Queen mining rights, sold to the highest bidder. He stood there in a crisp black coat, smiling like a preacher at a funeral, announcing the mine would go for pennies to the man who can actually make it profitable. Word had spread fast that Lila Voss had burned to death with her father's dream. People whispered. Some looked sorry. Most looked away. Lila watched everything from the shadowed alley behind Maggie Thorne's saloon, her heart hammering so hard she felt sick. She wanted to walk out there. She wanted to scream the truth in Victor's face. She wanted to put a bullet where his smile lived. But Colt's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "Not yet," he murmured. "Trust me on this." While Victor paraded his lies, Colt slipped away with Tommy Reed. He took the boy to the small white church at the edge of town. Reverend Elias Crow was waiting inside door, slightly ajar. Tommy's small hands twisted together as he stood before the Reverend. His voice trembled, but he spoke anyway. Mr. Kane? He made us work the old shafts at night, the ones that weren't safe. Kids like me. Said if we told anyone, we'd end up like our parents, buried and forgotten. Colt stood in the corner, jaw tight, saying nothing. But his eyes burned with memories he never spoke aloud. At the same time, inside the Dusty Rose saloon, Maggie Thorne moved quietly from table to table. She spoke in low voices to the miners, the widows, the families who had lost everything to Victor Kane's loans and foreclosures. One by one, they signed a simple sheet of paper she kept hidden under the bar. Names, stories, proof of the lives he had crushed. Lila stayed behind the curtained window, watching the auction from afar. Every time Victor laughed, something dark twisted tighter inside her chest. One bullet. That's all it would take. She could almost feel the weight of the gun in her hand. The thought terrified her more than anything. Because if she pulled that trigger, she would become exactly what she hated. The same kind of monster who stole, burned, and smiled while doing it. Her breath came shallow. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Papa, tell me what to do. I don't want to be like him. By late afternoon, the auction was over. Victor Kane walked away with papers that claimed the Silver Queen as good as his. But something had shifted in the air of Dust Creek. Whispers followed him now. Doubt, quiet anger. When Colt returned, he found Lila sitting on the back steps of the saloon, staring at the silver badge in her hands. Tommy sat beside her, leaning gently against her side, like he belonged there. Colt lowered himself carefully onto the step, wincing at the pull of his burns. "We're not alone anymore," he said softly. "The town's starting to remember what fear feels like. And they're tired of it." Lila looked at him, eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I almost walked out there today with a gun. I wanted to end it the way he does." Colt nodded slowly, understanding heavy in his voice. "I know that feeling. Carried it for years after he took my family." He reached out not to touch her, but to rest his hand near hers on the wooden step. "But if we fight his way, we lose who we are." Lila closed her eyes. The weight of choice pressed down on her harder than the desert heat. She thought of Tommy's thin shoulders, of Maggie's quiet courage, of Reverend Crow's steady words. For the first time, she understood. Justice wasn't going to come from a single bullet in the dust. It would have to come from something slower, something harder. From the trust of people who had been broken too. And from her own decision not to become the darkness she was fighting. The sun dipped lower, painting the town in long golden light. Somewhere in the distance, Victor Kane was celebrating his victory. But in the shadows behind the saloon, a different kind of power was quietly gathering. One built on truth instead of fear. In this part of the story, you'll feel the painful turning point when a wounded heart must choose between becoming the enemy or becoming something better. And how real justice often begins not with violence, but with the courage to gather others and stand together. The courthouse in Dust Creek had never felt so small. Every bench was filled. Miners with calloused hands, widows in faded dresses, ranch hands who rarely spoke. They all sat shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with sweat dust and unspoken anger. At the front, Victor Kane sat like he already owned the room. His lawyer, Victor Lang, arranged stacks of forged papers with confident fingers. A smug half-smile played on Kane's thin lips as he waited for Judge Harlan Tate to begin. Then the side door opened. Lila Voss stepped inside. She carried no gun, only an old leather satchel worn soft by years of her father's hands. She walked straight to the front, her step slow but steady. Her eyes met Victor Kane's for one long second. He didn't blink. She didn't look away. Judge Tate struck his gavel once the sound, sharp in the heavy silence. "Miss Voss," he said, "you may speak." Lila opened the satchel. She pulled out a bundle of yellowed letters and carefully kept ledgers. "These are my father's records," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "They show every barrel of water he shared during the drought years, every sack of cornmeal he gave to families who had nothing. He never asked for payment. He only asked that we remember we're all trying to survive the same land." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the papers on the judge's desk. Victor Kane leaned forward, ready to speak, but Judge Tate raised a hand. Then a small voice rose from the back of the room. Tommy Reed stood up. The 11-year-old boy looked tiny among the grown men, but he didn't sit back down. His hands were clenched at his sides. His voice shook. "Mr. Kane. He made us children work the old shafts after dark, the ones that could collapse any minute. He said if we stopped, we'd have no place to sleep, no food. I saw 2 boys get hurt real bad. He just told us to keep digging." The courtroom went deathly still. Tommy's eyes filled with tears, but he kept going. "I'm not lying, Your Honor. I swear on my mama's grave." Reverend Elias Crow rose next, his black coat neat and simple. He spoke with the calm weight of a man who had buried too many dreams. "Biblical silver may shine," he said softly, "but real silver, the kind that lasts, is found in how we treat one another when the wells run dry." Maggie Thorne stood beside him, arms crossed, voice strong and steady. "I've got 37 signatures from folks in this town who lost their homes or their land because of Victor Kane's debts. They're ready to speak if needed." Victor Kane's smile finally cracked. His lawyer whispered urgently, but Kane waved him off and rose to his feet. "These are lies," he snarled. "Emotional stories from a dead man's daughter and a street orphan he never finished." Colt Ramsey stepped forward and stood quietly beside Lila. Not in front of her, not behind her, right beside her, as an equal. His burned arm was still bandaged, but his presence filled the space with quiet strength. Judge Harlan Tate looked slowly across the room. Then he spoke, his voice ringing with final authority. "All documents presented by Mr. Kane are hereby declared fraudulent and void. The original claim to the Silver Queen mine is restored to Miss Lila Voss, on the condition that the mine be worked for the benefit of this entire community. No man owns the silver alone." A stunned silence fell. Then Victor Kane exploded. He lunged forward, face twisted with rage. "This court is corrupt. I built this town." But the people rose. Not with shouts, not with guns. They simply stood, one by one. Miners, widows, shopkeepers. The same people who had once looked away now formed a wall of silent judgment around him. Victor Kane looked left, then right. For the first time, real fear flashed in his eyes. He backed toward the door, shoving past bodies, and disappeared into the dusty street. The courtroom slowly emptied. Outside, the sky had darkened. A soft rain began to fall, of the first real rain in months. Lila and Colt walked up the gentle hill behind the town. Tommy walked a few steps ahead, turning his small face up to catch the raindrops, a shy smile breaking across his face. At the top, Lila and Colt stopped. Below them, Dust Creek glistened under the gentle shower. Smoke no longer rose from the ruined mine. Instead, lanterns began to flicker on in windows, warm, hopeful lights. Lila looked down at the silver badge still in her hand. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "My father didn't die for silver. He died believing people could be better than their worst mistakes. She turned to Colt. He looked at her not as a man who needed to protect her, but as someone who had chosen to walk beside her. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and took her hand. Their fingers intertwined. No rush, no demand, just a quiet promise. The rain fell softer now, washing the dust from the rooftops, from the streets, and maybe from their hearts. In the distance, thunder rolled gently, not a warning, but a benediction. Lila closed her eyes and let the rain touch her face. For the first time since that terrible midnight at the mine, she felt something close to peace. Because justice wasn't found in revenge. It was built slowly and painfully by choosing to protect what greed had tried to destroy. And family, real family, wasn't made by blood. It was made by oaths that refused to break, even when the whole world tried to burn them down. In this final chapter, you'll witness how true courage and community can rebuild what hatred tears apart, and how the strongest bonds are often forged not in easy times, but in the fire of choosing kindness over revenge. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.